In this video, we will continue our discussion of lists. First, let's start by adding some new pictures that I have downloaded from the internet to my project. So I copy these new pictures and I paste them inside the drawable folder of my project. Alright, the new pictures are added, so I replace the second part of my list with the new items that are available in the drawable directory. So I change John to Adam, and its corresponding drawable to Adam as well. And the next one will be Anastasia, and its corresponding drawable to Anastasia. Next one, Chris, Clara, and its drawable Clara. Florina, Yan. The reason why I'm doing this is that I want to have distinct items in my list and also a longer list. So r.drawable.yan and Richard, the initials should be in capital. Richard. Next one, Roman or Roman, and Roman, it's drawable. Tor, it's drawable. And I think we're good to go. I have mentioned all the names, so I remove the last one, which is Ted. The first thing I'm going to talk about in this video is support for content padding in lazy lists. So with content padding, you can add padding to the content of your list. For example, let's consider this list. I can have a padding from the start of the content, this part, and I can also add a padding to the content from the end of the list, or from the top, or from the bottom, and for the other list as well. So before I do that, I'm gonna arrange my previews a little bit so that I can have both previews in the same screen. So I move the second preview to the first one in the default preview. So first I'm gonna display my horizontal list, and I'm gonna put both of them inside a column. This way it will be similar to what we see in the application that is running on the emulator or on the phone. So let's build and refresh. Alright, Now we have our previews here in the same screen, and I'm gonna add content padding to my vertical list. So I open it, and in my vertical list UI I have a lazy column. I'm gonna add a parameter to lazy column, content padding, and for its value I type padding values. Note that for padding values I can pass only one parameter, or 2 parameters, or 4 parameters. There are 3 forms to call padding values. If you want to have the padding for all 4 sides, you can use the first form. If you want to have the same padding for start and end side of your list, you can use the second. And if you want to have a different padding for every side, for each side of your list, you can use the third form of padding values. I'm gonna use the second form for horizontal sides. I'm gonna use a different padding from what I will use for the vertical sides. So for horizontal, I'm gonna use 16 depth, and for vertical I'm gonna use 4 depth. Let's decrease the horizontal to 8 depth. Let's refresh our preview. We can change this in real time so that you can see the change that is applied by modifying the value of these components of content padding. So for example, I change the horizontal component to 32. You can see that the paddings are changing. I change it to 42. It changed more. I change it back to 4. I change it to 8. You can see that the padding is applied to the content, not to the list itself, and this is very important. I can also change the vertical component from 4 to 8 or to 16. You can see the change that is applied. So I change it back to 4. I can have the same thing for the other list as well. So I go to my horizontal list and I add this parameter content padding to lazy row padding values, and I'm gonna use the third form for the start. I'm gonna use 8 depth or 4 depth, and for the top I'm gonna use 2 depth, and for the bottom I'm gonna use 4 depth. These are arbitrary values that I'm using to only show how it is used. So I build and refresh. Let's see how changing these values affects the display of the horizontal list. So I changed the top component from 2 to 16. You can see that the padding is obvious 32, and now it is more. So I change it back to 2, and now we are back in the same padding that we were initially using. So this was for content padding, the padding that is added to the content of our lazy list. The next topic I'm gonna talk about is content spacing, and with that I mean the space that we can have for the elements of the list, between the elements of the list. And this is easy to implement and to use. First, let's start with our horizontal list. The way we use it, because in a horizontal list we are arranging the items in a horizontal manner, I'm gonna say horizontal arrangement. This is a parameter of lazy row, and for its value we say arrangement dot spaced by, and then we specify the space that we want to be used between our elements. So for example, I'm gonna use 8 dep between the elements, and I do the same for my vertical list. I go to my vertical list, and because in a lazy column the items are arranged in a vertical way, we are gonna use this parameter, vertical arrangement, and for its value I use arrangement dot spaced by, and then I specify the space that I want to use between the elements. This time I'm gonna use 16 dep, although it's a little bit too much. We can adjust it. Let's build and refresh. Alright, as you can see, we have a bigger space now between our elements. We can see the change that is applied as we change this value. Let's change it from 16 to 32, and you can see the change that is applied. I can change it to 64, and now it's too much, and you can see the obvious change that is applied. And I change it to 8, like this, and even that is much, so I use 4. So that's it, how we use content spacing for adding space between our elements. The next thing I'm going to talk about in this video is going to be sticky headers. And with sticky headers, you can keep one header sticked or stuck to the top of your screen and then scroll the other elements. This is especially useful for implementing a list of contacts, for example, that you are sorting alphabetically so that, for example, when you are browsing the list of contacts, you can stick the first letter of contacts that are starting, for example, with A, and A is going to stick to the top, and then you scroll all other contacts that are starting with A, and then you go to B, and then B is sticking to the top, and you scroll all the elements that are starting with B, and you go to C, and C is sticking to the top, and you scroll other elements, and so on and so forth. But before I do that, I'm gonna make some apparent changes to my list so that I can have completely round images for my elements in the list. So first, let's start with our horizontal list. In this horizontal list, I have my items in a row, and as you can see, I have used an equal weight for both items, for the name and for the image. So I'm gonna remove the weight from my image, and now the size will be 150, and it doesn't have to follow the weight that is forced onto the image, and therefore it will have the round shape that we are applying to the clip. So let's refresh our preview. It is still not displaying in a round way. The reason is that the height is not enough. The height that I am using for the row is less than the height of the image. So I have to make it more, 150, and you can see that it is displaying the images round. And also I'm gonna remove the name element. I'm gonna only use the image. I don't need the row here, so I remove it. I paste the image instead. So I have a size and then the clip. Let's build and refresh. There we go. I'm gonna use a similar thing for the vertical list. In my vertical list, I'm gonna remove the weight from the image and make sure that the height of my row is enough for the image to be displayed in a circular way. There we go. Now the image is round. Alright, the next thing I'm going to do is, as I mentioned, applying and using sticky headers. Let's show that with a simple example. First, with my vertical list. In this vertical list, inside the body of my lazy column, I'm gonna use a header that will be the title of the list, the header of the list. So I use this function, sticky header, and inside this sticky header I'm gonna use the content that is supposed to be displayed there. I use a simple text element, and for this text element I use a string resource r.string.list of contacts, for example. Let's create a string resource named list of contacts by pressing Alt and Enter. List of contacts for resource value, and let's use a text alignment to align the text in the center, and also a style so that we can use a text with a style that is suitable for title. So I use material theme.typography.h3, for example. And also let's add a little bit of padding with modifier.padding for dip, and we see a red notice here which says this foundation API is experimental and is likely to change or be removed in future. So in order to be able to use this function in our application, we need to add this annotation: opt-in experimental foundation API, or experimental @experimental foundation API to the function that is using it. So you can see that sticky header is used by my vertical list UI, and it is in turn used by default preview. So I added here @experimental foundation API. It is still there, the notice is still there. So instead I use opt-in, and also I make sure that my onCreate function also doesn't need it. Okay, it doesn't need that annotation, so I'm good to go. Let's refresh our preview. We have list of contacts to see if it is really acting as a sticky header, and it doesn't move with our scroll. I run it on the emulator. You can also use the interactive mode in the preview pane. Alright, the application is running. Let's scroll. There we go. As you can see, the title of the list of contacts, is sticking to the top, and we have a sticky header. It's not that beautiful. That's because it doesn't have a background color, so we can add a background color to it so that the items are not overlaid. So I go to my sticky header, and for the text I'm gonna use a background. First, let's actually use a fill max width so that we fill the whole available width, and then let's use a background color, color dot white. Let's import color from androidx.compose.ui.graphics package. All right, let's run it again. All right, there we go. Now the sticky part sticks to the top, and it is also not overlaying with the items of the list because it has a background color. Okay, that is an easy usage of sticky header. But what if you want to have a list that is grouped? So for example, you have a list of contacts and you want to group them with their initials. Let's see that in action. Here, as you can see, I have several names. For example, John, Jackie, Jade, Jane, and Jennifer, and Gerard all start with J, so I can group them as the contacts starting with J. So when I scroll those elements, the letter J is going to stick to the top, and when I scroll the names starting with T, that include Ted and Tor, T is going to stick to the top, and then the items will be scrolled until the next letter, and so on and so forth. So first, in order to do that, I'm gonna create another list for holding these values that will be sorted and grouped. So val contacts or profiles grouped, and I'm gonna use some Kotlin functionality here. Profiles list dot sorted by. I'm gonna sort it by the name. This will give me a list that is sorted alphabetically from A to Z, and then I'm gonna group it again by the initial, the first letter of the name. So it dot name index 0. I'm gonna group it with the initial letter. Now I have the list of contacts or profiles that are grouped by the initials, and therefore I can do what I wanted to do. So I go to my vertical list UI, and here before items indexed, I remove this sticky header, or I comment it out, and what I'm gonna do here is use the grouped list profiles grouped, and as you can see, this profiles grouped variable is a map of character to list. So each character in this group is mapped to a list. For example, J, the letter J, the character J is mapped to a list that includes John, Jackie, Jade, Jane, and Jennifer and Gerard. So now that I know it is a map, I can say for each item in this map, entry, for each entry, I will use one sticky header, in which I will display the initial letter. So entry dot key, which is the initial letter, to a string. I convert it to a string, I cast it to a string. And also I use a style of material theme dot typography dot h4 or h3, and a text align of center like this. And after the sticky header, I'm gonna display the other items. So I say entry dot value, which is the list for each item in that list. Create an item in my lazy list. So create an item, and what will be the content of each item? It will be this row, and I already have that row implemented previously, so I copy that, actually I cut it, and I paste it inside this item. Like this. I remove items indexed because I have used profile previously for each entry. I'm gonna use profile here as the item that is passed to for each, and I'm gonna remove index from here. Now it should work. I have a sticky header for each letter, and then will follow all the names that start with that letter. And when scrolling those names and those profiles, that letter will stick to the top. Let's run it and see the result. There we go. As you can see, I have the letter A for all the sorted names that start with A, and A is sticking to the top as long as I'm scrolling those names. And when I reach C, then C is going to stick to the top like this, and then E is sticking to the top, and I scroll Edward and Eliza, and then I reach F, and F is sticking to the top, and so on and so forth. That follows the same convention, but I'm going to add a background to this letter, to this sticky header, so that those items do not overlay each other. However, this is beautiful the way that it is displaying. It's not that bad. I'm gonna add a little bit of background to it, a little bit of different background. So let's add a modifier. Background color dot green, for example, and run it. There we go. A little bit of padding as well. Padding and some clip. Add a circle shape to it. With a size of 50 depth, for example. Okay, it's not displaying that in a circular shape. Let's skip it for now. I'm not gonna use size and clipping for now, and that's good. So in this video we talked about content padding, content spacing, and sticky headers for composed lists.